Despite his attempts to paint Democrats as anti-Jewish, President Trump has himself, as Eli said, been accused of peddling an anti-Semitism in the past. In 2015, he made these remarks to members of the Republican Jewish coalition.
I know why you're not going to support me. And, you know, you're not going to support me because I don't want your money. You want to control your own politician. That's fine. Good.
Anyway, in 2016, then candidate Trump tweeted and later deleted an image of Hillary Clinton over a bed of money. Well, this is really subtle. Next to a six-pointed star. Indeed, it was the Star of David. As president, he refused to condemn the white supremacist march in Charlottesville in 2017 that included anti-Semitic chants, of course, they always do, saying they were fine people on both sides. Well, charges of anti-Semitism have also extended to high-ranking congressional Republicans. Last October, in a tweet, then House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy singled out Democratic voters with Jewish heritage, George Soros, Michael Bloomberg, and Tom Steyer, for attempting to, quote, buy this election. McCarthy later deleted the tweet, but not our memory of it. Tom Steyer, your thoughts about this latest problem for Trump?
Look, I don't think there's any question that Mr. Trump has been associated intentionally with the vilification of different people, including Jews in our society. And I think that it's a tactic that he uses to divide and conquer people, that he plays on racism intentionally and has done it for his entire political career. And I think this is one more attempt by him to divide and conquer people based on race, ethnicity, and religion. I think it's 100% wrong. And I think that it is something as un-American as I can imagine.
Well, his people certainly know what he's feeling because they express it openly. Fox News host Jeanine Pirro stirred trouble on Saturday night with comments she made criticizing Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who's Muslim. Here she goes. Jeanine.
She's not getting this anti-Israel sentiment doctrine from the Democrat Party. So if it's not rooted in the party, where is she getting it from? Think about it. Omar wears a hijab, which according to the Quran 33:59 tells women to cover so they won't get molested. Is her adherence to this Islamic doctrine indicative of her adherence to Sharia law, which in itself is antithetical to the United States Constitution?
Are you following that? Anyway, the statement late Sunday night, Fox News strongly condemned Pirro's remarks about Congresswoman Omar, adding they do not reflect those of the network, and we have addressed the matter with her directly. Cornell, that's a hell of a you have to pass that mark. Fox is too much for Fox. But what do you think about the stretch appealing to an audience, pandering to an audience that has a problem with Muslim people, to go all the way of saying if she wears this hijab, that somehow that says she wants to get rid of the Constitution?
Well, look, we know that that's part of their game plan. You know, being a tribal warrior is Trump's ace in the hole. You know, they're not that base of voters who stick to him. They are the most anxious about the changes that are happening in our country. So you feed that, and you continue to feed that, and that's the shame of it. But it's also, and I know I'm thinking of an odd man out on the whole Jewish question. But what Sarah Huckabee did, because I was watching what Sarah Huckabee did today, it was just disgraceful. Because you know what? I'm a partisan Democrat. All Republicans aren't anti-Jewish. All Republicans aren't anti-black. They don't hate blacks. And despite the wall, all Republicans aren't anti-Mexican. It's an easy thing to say. It's an easy thing to say, and we have to sort of call for our better angels in those positions than that. It shouldn't be a partisan issue at all.
Let me go back to Congressman Sharansky on that. Schakowsky, I'm sorry to mispronounce your name. That's an awful thing to do. But Schakowsky, thank you, Congressman. I know you forever. Let me ask you about this whole question of ethnicity and Trump. I never can tell whether it's in his heart, and this is a tough one for any politician or journalist. Is it in his heart to be nastily bigoted, or is it always a card he plays, perhaps surrounded by a pretty conservative group of people? Maybe who don't like black people. In fact, some. I always thought his original sin was going after Trump and claiming he was a foreigner from Africa, that he was not an American, that he was snuck into the country, that he didn't really go to these schools. Because I thought that appealed to the worst kind of right-winger. But I don't know whether he feels it. Did he really think this guy was a phantom?
I believe, of all things that he is canny. And he understands that certain words trigger a certain response. Now, why would he not condemn Ilhan Omar? Because he had the Muslim ban. That was his first act to ban Muslims from coming into the country. And now the anti-immigrant rhetoric in general from south of the border. This is the hate monger in chief, and it gets him points. He wants to incite and excite his base, and though he knows the words that do that, and that's exactly the kind of politics that he wants to play. It's very intentional.
Do you think he feels it himself, or he's just working the crowd?
You know, I am not sure what Donald Trump believes in. He believes in what, at the moment, makes him feel good. What fills up the deep hole that he has inside him that needs to be filled every single day. And if he can get the adoration of his base, he'll say anything.
What difference does it make if he feels it or not? If you are going around stoking racism, you're a racist. I don't care if you feel it or not. If you're stoking racism, you're a racist.
Thank you.
I hate this question about if it's in his heart.
Well, and it's the fear. It's the politics of.
I made a mistake.
It's the politics of fear. That it's the fear of the other, and it's something that you just pointed out. It's unique in our history to have a president who is really trying to pit different groups of Americans
It's
against
extraordinary to me that a person would be so evil as to make up a prejudice and pretend to have one. I don't know if that's worse or not, but it's
It might be.
Anyway, U.S. Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Chicago and Eli Stokols and Chicago. Cornell Belcher, I got to pronounce it right by a local version anyway. And Tom Steyer. Tom, thank you for coming on and keep up your work.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.